The History of the Devil and the Idea of Evil, from the Earliest Times to the Present Day, by Paul Carus. This book offers, in my opinion, a good starting point for curious seekers on origin of things. Despite it being published in 1900, this book, which is in the public domain, is like the perfect little black dress, or for guys, the classic white or blue button-up shirt. Just doesn't seem to go out of style. And I'm finding, perhaps you are too, as I remove the dust off some of these dusty tomes, whether they be sacred text, philosophical writings, poems, hymns, etc., despite the years that have passed, many remain timeless pieces, which gives us insights to the human experience. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In the previous video, the author laid the foundation of good and evil as religious ideas, and I believe he chose that route early in this book because of the historical first human written records from the Sumerian ancient civilization, which was located in the Mesopotamia region, situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq. We are now in the second video chapter of this book, in which the author takes us further into the concept of good and evil and the idea of devil or Satan through the lens of Zoroastrianism, Brahmanism, and Hinduism. Zoroastrianism is said to date back to circa 1500 to 1200 BC, a date suggested by linguistic and archaeological evidence, making Zoroastrian one of the oldest monotheistic religions still in existence. You know, we throw dates around like it's nothing. The time difference between 1500 BC and 2025 AD is 3,525 years. A lot of stuff has happened from then till now. The idea of the devil in Zoroastrianism arose from the religion's core belief in a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Over time, this dualistic struggle evolved, as do many things in life, which seems to stack up on old foundations, and so I'm learning religions are no different. Zarathustra, also known as Zoroaster, was an ancient Iranian prophet and the founder of Zoroastrianism. Generally, he is accepted as a real historical figure, but there is debate about when he lived. What is known of him comes primarily from the religious texts of Zoroastrianism, such as the Avestas, of which the Gathas were 17 philosophical hymns or poems composed by the prophet himself. Zoroaster is mentioned by Plato in his work Alcibiades I, where he calls Zoroaster the son of Oromasdes and a founder of the religion of the Magi. While perhaps not precise biographical details, it provides evidence of his historical presence and influence. And as some may come to learn, sometimes figures in sacred texts are not found in historical documents. Yet, as any good story, the use of historical events and locations add a sense of truth to a well-constructed allegory. This by no means diminishes the value of the profound spiritual lesson which is intended to be held within its text, and are meant only for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Zoroastrianism was said to be spread primarily through the Persian Empire's natural expansion, the trade routes and migration, not through any forced conversion. Some Zoroastrian interpretations propose that Ahriman was a created being, not a god, who chose evil. The author will go into more detail. The concept of a dualistic struggle between good and evil is a central theme of Zoroastrianism, which teaches that humans have free will to choose a side, whether it's through their thoughts, their words, and deeds. It is said that Zoroastrianism influenced other major religions, as we will come to learn, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, through a slow and unfolding process. As I was doing my research for this intro, I found it interesting that neither Zoroastrianism nor Brahmanism, which we'll talk about, neither of them came first, which is the next one that we're going to talk about in a minute. According to scholars, these boths are considered parallel developments stemming from the shared ancestral culture and their similar belief system, which split into two distinct branches, that of the Indian and the other Iranian. The earliest religious texts of both traditions, the Gathas and the Rig Veda, show apparently significant linguistic and thematic similarities due to this shared origin. I must say, I am fascinated with the ability of linguists, specifically historical linguists and linguistic anthropology, to reconstruct past languages and track the history of certain words, which provides insight into population movements, cultural diffusion, and social structures. These people are scientists in their own right, offering truths that were held or are held in the words of man at specific locations and places in time. Very fascinating. I mention it because the author does mention linguists a few times. But I digress. I'd like to share a few more points before I get into the book. The next is Judaism, and of course the author goes into much detail. In Judaism, the first appearance of the word Satan, which means adversary, is found in the Torah, also known as the Pentateuch, which simply refers to the first 5 books of the Bible, the Old Testament being Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Satan as such functions as a title for an office or a role that an angel or even a human can fulfill, rather than a specific individual as a proper name. The first clear instance of Satan as a specific recurring individual figure appears later on, notably in the book of Job and in the book of Zechariah, which are not part of the Pentateuch. The Old Testament contains many noble ideas and great truths, originating from a specific culture and is noted as a remarkable collection of religious books. But one can't help think about the God of that Old Testament and not cringe in fear. These folks not only made God responsible for and accessory to the crimes which their own people committed, and they wrote about it, atrocities to include theft, murder, and rape, but they also shared the same superstitions that were commonly in vogue among the primitives of their time, such as the custom of burying people alive under foundation stones. And here are a few biblical references in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 22, where an angel stands in the path of the wicked prophet Balaam to act as an adversary, Satan against him. The first book of Chronicles, chapter 21, verse 1, refers to Satan standing up against Israel and inciting David to take a census. In the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 6 through 12, and Job, chapter 2, 1 through 7, the Satan is a member of God's heavenly council who acts as an accuser against Job. And in Zechariah, chapter 3, verse 1 through 2, the Satan stands at the right hand of Joshua, the high priest, to accuse him. It seems that in Judaism, all acts of punishment, revenge, and temptation are performed by Yahweh himself, which is the name for God of the Israelites, or by his angel. In spite of the severity of the law against wizards and witches, the Israelites were, so it seems, inclined to resort to their help. Even Saul, who had done his best to exterminate soothsayers, caved in, when in his greatest anxiety called on the witch of Endor. This story is found in the Old Testament from the first book of Samuel, chapter 28, verse 3 through 25. A female sorcerer who was visited by Saul, the first king of Israel. She was to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. However, what was summoned, whether the actual ghost of Samuel or a spirit impersonating him, delivered a prophecy of doom against Saul and his army, who were defeated. Now again, other than the Bible, King Saul is not a confirmed historical figure, a point which is debated among various scholars. There are no non-biblical texts or definitive archaeological evidence that directly mentions him. It is said that the first non-biblical recorded king of Israel is Omri or Amri, who founded a dynasty and is mentioned in extra-biblical sources like the Mesha stele and the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, Although biblical sources mention kings like Saul, David, and Solomon, these figures are not mentioned in non-biblical records, which, for historical significance, leads some scholars to question the biblical narrative of a united monarchy. And between you and I, not to get political here, but one can't help it, or, anyone with common sense, would look at the world news of our current times and conclude that even today, there is still unrest in the region. It is evident from various passages, such as seen in Leviticus, that the Israelites believed in evil spirits dwelling in darkness and waste places. And the cause of evil is understood as a combination of the misuse of human free will, which originated with the choices made by Adam and Eve. And it would seem, according to Judaism, that this evil is a necessary component of the divine plan for growth and testing and serves a higher purpose. Now, the concept of good and evil goes out the window when it comes to Brahmanism, with its many rites and sacrifices. Yeah, human sacrifices. They called it Purushamedha. There is an interesting resource. I left a link in the description of this video with others as well, and it goes into detail of archaeological evidence proving that human sacrifices were performed. Brahmanism was founded between 1100 and 500 BC, which as a distinct religion is not active today. It was established by the Indo-Aryan people who migrated to the Indus Valley, but its influence continues as a foundational element with modern Hinduism, known as Sanatan Dharma. It is interesting to note that Brahmanism and the caste system developed alongside each other, and I can't help but think of the cunning of certain people. Yeah, as the Brahmins were recognized in influencing the caste system of India by establishing a religious hierarchy where Brahmins, the priestly class, were at the top due to their role as custodians of sacred knowledge and religious rituals. There is no concept of an absolute devil. Instead, it explained that evil is a result of ego, karma, and avidya, which is a Sanskrit word for ignorance. And these are seen as manifestations of Maya, being the illusionary nature of the material world. They see Brahman as the supreme, universal, and eternal essence in Hinduism, representing the ultimate reality and the divine ground of all existence. It is considered the source of the universe, the power that creates and preserves and destroys it. Basically, it is the spiritual core of all living things, known as Atman. Brahman itself is considered beyond good and evil, and its creation includes the potential for both positive and negative experiences, which are temporary and subject to the laws of karma. And with time, there came a shift from the emphasis of ritual sacrifices to the devotional bhakti, worship of the specific gods and goddesses, giving way to what we know today as Hinduism, where for Hinduism, evil is not an absolute or external force, but rather a concept stemming from that law of karma, where actions have consequences. So it is understood that as a result of ignorance or ego, leading to actions that cause harm to oneself or others or society. And consequently, evil is considered a temporary state that arises from a person's choices, and they're linked to the cycle of samsara, which means rebirth. How things come to be? I believe because we make it so through our word. We label things, even things unknown, and they come into being, corporeal or not. Nothing is more common in history than the change of the deities of hostile nations into demons of evil. In this way, Beelzebub, the Phoenician god, became another name for Satan, and Hinnom, or Gehenna, the place where Moloch had been worshipped in the valley of Tophet, became the Hebrew name for hell. And as only a linguist might be able to explain it best, but we could see here how that word, there's a word Sheol, which is the original Hebrew term for the world of the dead, often translated as grave or underworld, while Gehenna became associated with the eternal punishment of the wicked due to the valley's history as a place of both child sacrifice and later a continually burning refuse for dump, and these words just become introduced into the everyday language. As I look through these texts, I can't help but notice the delicate web, or that fine thread between a government and its direct association with a religion, the two trying to vie for establishment of moral compass. And it's a very fine line when one joins the other. As I ready to turn the page, please do take a moment and let me know you were here. Hit the like button, drop a comment, and yes, subscribe to the channel. I now turn the page. Persian Dualism. The transition from devil worship to God worship marks the origin of civilization. And among the nations of antiquity, the Persians seem to have been the first who took this step with conscious deliberation, for they most earnestly insisted upon the contrast that obtains between good and evil, so much so that their religion is even today regarded as the most consistent form of dualism. The founder of Persian dualism was Zarathustra, or as the Greeks called him, Zoroaster, a name which in its literal translation means golden splendor. Zoroaster, the great prophet of Mazdaism, the belief in Mazda, the omniscient one, it is rightly assumed, was not so much the founder of a new era as the concluding link in a long chain of aspiring prophets before him. The field was ripe for the harvest when he appeared, and others must have prepared the way for his movement. Zoroaster is in all later writings represented as a demigod, a fact which suggested to Professor Darmstaedter the idea that he was a mythical figure. Nevertheless, and although we know little of Zoroaster's life, we have the documentary evidence in the Gathas that he was a real historical personality. Professor A.V. Williams Jackson, in an essay on the date of Zoroaster, arrives at the conclusion that he lived between the latter half of the 7th and the middle of the 6th century, and Dr. E.W. West points out the calendar reform in which the old Persian names of the months were supplanted by Zoroastrian names was introduced in the year 505 BC. This proves that the kings of the Achaemenid dynasty were Zoroastrians. Professor Jack says, quote, "The kingdom of Bactria was the scene of Zoroaster's zealous ministry, as I presume, born, as I believe, in the Atropatene to the west of Media. This prophet, without honor in his own country, met with a congenial soil for the seeds of his teaching in eastern Iran. His ringing voice of reform and of a nobler faith found an answering echo in the heart of the Bactrian king Veshtaspa, whose strong arm gave necessary support to the crusade that spread the new faith west and east throughout the land of Iran." Allusions to this crusade are not uncommon in Zoroastrian literature. Its advance must have been rapid, a fierce religious war, which in a way was fatal to Bactria, seems to have ensued with Turan. This was that same savage race in history at whose door the death of victorious Cyrus is laid. Although tradition tells us that the sad story that the fire of the sacred altar was quenched in the blood of the priests when Turan stormed Balkh, the momentary defeat was but the gathering force of victory. Triumph was at hand. The spiritual spark of the regeneration lingered among the embers and was destined soon to burst into the flame of Persian power that swept over decaying Media and formed the beacon torch that lighted up the land of Iran in early history." End quote. The Gathas are hymns. They are a product of the 5th and 6th centuries before Christ, the authenticity of which is sufficiently proved not only by the later Persian literature, the Pahlavi books, but also by Greek authors, especially by passages quoted in Plutarch and Diogenes Laertes from Theopompus, who wrote at the end of the 4th century before Christ. The Gathas profess to be written by Zoroaster, who appears in them not as a demigod, but as a struggling and suffering man, sometimes elated by the grandeur of his aspirations, firmly convinced of his prophetic mission, and then again dejected and full of doubt as to the final success of the movement to which he devoted all his energies. Says Professor L.H. Mill, the translator of the Gathas, quote, "Their doctrines and exhortations concern an actual religious movement taking place contemporaneously with their composition, and that movement was exceptionally pure and most earnest. That any forgery is present in the Gathas, any desire to palm off doctrines upon the sacred community in the name of the great prophet, as in the Vendidad and later Yasna, is quite out of the question. The Gathas are genuine in their mass." End quote. There were two religious parties in the days of Zoroaster, the worshippers of the Devas or nature gods, and the worshippers of Ahura, the Lord. Zoroaster appears in the Gathas as a priest of the highest rank who became the leader of the Ahura party. Zoroaster not only degraded the old natured gods, the Devas, into demons, but also regarded them as representatives of a fiendish power which he called Angro Manyush or Ahriman, which means the evil spirit, and Druj, i.e. falsehood. The Scythians in the plains of northern Asia, the most dangerous neighbors of Persia, worshipped their highest deity under the symbol of a serpent, and it was natural that the snake Afrasiab, the god of the enemy, became identified with the archfiend Ahriman. Footnote: Druj, fiend, is always feminine, while Ahriman is masculine. End footnote. The Persians are often erroneously called fire worshippers, but it goes without saying that as the sun is not a god and cannot, according to Zoroaster, in and for itself receive divine honor or be worshipped, so the flame which is lit in praise of Ahura Mazda is a symbol only of him who is the light of the soul and the principle of all goodness. Zoroaster taught that Ahriman was not created by Ahura, but that he was possessed of independent existence. The evil spirit, to be sure, was not equal to the Lord in dignity, nor even in power. Nevertheless, both were creative, and both were original in being themselves uncreated. They were the representatives of contradictory principles. And this doctrine constitutes the dualism of the Persian religion, which is most unmistakably expressed in the words of the 30th Yasna. Quote, "Well known are the two primeval spirits correlated but independent. One is the better and the other is the worse as to thought, as to word, as to deed, and between these two let the wise choose aright." End of quote. Ahura Mazda, the omniscient Lord, reveals himself through the excellent, the pure, and stirring. On the rock inscription of Elbend, which had been made by the order of King Darius, we read these lines, quote, "There is one God, omnipotent Ahura Mazda. It is he who has created the earth here. It is he who has created the heaven there. It is he who has created mortal man." End quote. The noble spirit of Zoroaster's religion appears from the following formula, which was in common use among the Persians and served as an introduction to every liturgic worship. Quote, "May Ahura be rejoiced. May Angro be destroyed by those who do truly what is God's all-important will. I praise well-considered thoughts, well-spoken words, and well-done deeds. I embrace all good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. I reject all evil thoughts, evil words, and evil deeds. I give sacrifice and prayer unto you, O Amisha Spenta, even with the fullness of my thoughts, of my words, of my deeds, and of my heart. I give unto you even my own life." End quote. Footnote: I recite the praise of holiness, the Ashem Vohu. Holiness is the best of all good. Well, is it for it? Well, is it for that holiness which is perfection of holiness? I confess myself a worshipper of Mazda, a follower of Zarathustra, one who hates the devas, devils, and obeys the laws of Ahura." End quote. Footnote. Says Dharmastater, the Asham Vohu is one of the holiest and most frequently recited prayers. The creative word, which was in the beginning, Ahuna Vario Hanover, reminds one not only of the Christian idea found in the Greek words logos, on, hen, and archon, but also of the Brahmin vak, word etymology the same as the Latin vox, which is glorified in the fourth hymn of the Rig Veda as pervading heaven and earth, existing in all the worlds, and extending to the heavens. The six Amisha Spenta, the undying and well-doing ones, are what Christians might call archangels. Originally, they had been 7, but the first and greatest among them, Ahura Mazda, came to overshadow the divinity of the other 6. They remained powerful gods, but he was regarded as their father and creator. We read in Yast, chapter 19, verse 16, that they have one and the same thinking, one and the same speaking, one and the same doing, one and the same Father and Lord, who is Ahura Mazda. At first, the Amisha Spenta were mere personifications of virtues, but later on, they were entrusted with the government of the various domains of the universe. End footnote. Lenormant characterizes the god of Zoroaster as follows, quote, Ahura Mazda has created Asha, purity, or rather the cosmic order. He has created both the moral and material world constitution. He has made the universe. He has made the law. He is, in a word, creator, datar, sovereign, Ahura, omniscient, Mazdao, the god of order, Ashavan. He corresponds exactly to Varuna, the highest god of Vedism. This spiritual conception of the Supreme Being is absolutely pure in the Avesta, and the expressions that Ormuzd has the sun for his eye, the heaven for his garment, the lightning for his sons, the waters for his spouses, are unequivocally allegorical. Creator of all things, Ormuzd is himself uncreated and eternal. He had no beginning and will have no end. He has accomplished his creation work by pronouncing the word, the Ahuna Vario, Hanover, i.e., the word that existed before everything else, reminding us of the eternal word, the divine logos of the gospel. See Histoire Ancienne de l'Orient, chapter 5, page 388. End of quote. Concerning Ahriman, Lenormant says, quote, the creation came forth from the hands of Ormuzd, pure and perfect like himself. It was Ahriman who perverted it by his infamous influence and labored continually to destroy and overthrow it. For he is the destroyer, Bauruo Marka, as well as the spirit of evil. The struggle between these two principles of good and of evil constitutes the world's history. In Ahriman, we find again the old wrathful serpent of the Indo-Iranian period, who is the personification of evil and who in Vedism, under the name of Ahi, is regarded as an individual being. The myth of the serpent and the legends of the Avesta are mingled in Ahriman under the name of Aji Daka, who is said to have attacked Attar, Traitaona, and Yima, but is himself dethroned. It is the source of the Greek myth that Apollo slays the dragon Python. The Indo-Iranian religion knows only the struggle that was carried on in the atmosphere between the fire god and the serpendema Afrasiab. And it was, according to Professor Dharmastater, the doctrine of this struggle, which, when generalized and applied to all things in the world, finally led to the establishment of dualism." End quote. Says James Darmestader, the translator of the Zend Avesta, quote, "There were two general ideas at the bottom of the Indo-Iranian religion. First, that there is a law in nature, and secondly, that there is a war in nature. See the books, Sacred Books of the East, chapter 4. End quote. The law in nature proves the wisdom of Ahura, who is therefore called Mazda the Wise. The war in nature is due to the intrusion of Ahriman into the creation of Ahura. The fire sacrifice was accompanied by partaking of the Haoma drink, a ceremony which reminds us, on the one hand, of the Soma sacrifice of the Vedic age in India, and, on the other hand, of the Lord's Supper of the Christians. We know through the sacred scriptures of the Persians that little cakes, the draona, covered with small pieces of holy meat, the miazda, were consecrated in the name of a spiritual being, a god or angel, or of some great deceased personality, and then distributed among all the worshippers that were present. But more sacred still than the draona with the miazda is the haoma drink, which was prepared from the white haoma plant, also called gaukarina. Says Professor Darmestader, "It is by the drinking of gaukarina that men, on the day of the resurrection, will become immortal." The way in which the Persian sacrament of drinking the gaukarina was still celebrated in the times of the early Christianity must have been very similar to the Christian communion, for Justinus, when speaking of the Lord's Supper among the Christians, adds that this very solemnity, too, the evil spirits have introduced in the mysteries of Mithra. After death, according to the Zoroastrian doctrine, the soul must pass over Sinvato Peretush, that is, the accountant's bridge, where its future fate is decided. This bridge stretches over the yawning abyss of hell, from the peak of judgment to the divine Mount Alborz, and becomes, according to the most common statements of the doctrine, broad to the good, a pathway of 9 javelins in breadth, while to the wicked it is like the edge of a razor. Evildoers fall into the power of Ahriman and are doomed to hell. The good enter Garo Damana, the life of bliss, while those in whom good and evil are equal remain in an intermediate state, the Hamastakans of the Pahlavi books, until the great judgment day called Akka. The most characteristic features of the Persian religion after the lifetime of Zoroaster consist in the teaching that a great crisis is near at hand, which will lead to the renovation of the world called Frashokereti in the Avesta and Frashakart in Pahlavi. Saviors will come, born of the seed of Zoroaster, and in the end the great Savior who will bring about the resurrection of the dead. He will be the son of a virgin and the all-conquering. His name shall be victorious, Verethrajan, righteousness incarnate, Asvat Ereta, and the Savior, Saoshyant. Then the living shall become immortal, yet their bodies will be transfigured so that they will cast no shadows, and the dead shall rise. Within their lifeless bodies, incorporate life shall be restored. The Persian belief in the advent of a Savior who will make mankind immortal seems to reappear in an intenser form in the days of John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth, who preached that the kingdom of heaven is near at hand. St. Paul still believed that the second advent of Christ would take place during his own lifetime. The dead who sleep in the Lord will be resurrected, and the bodies of those that are still in the flesh will be transfigured and become immortal. The influence of Zoroaster's religion upon Judaism and early Christianity cannot be doubted. Not only does the original text of the book Ezra directly declare that Cyrus, the king, built the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, where they worship him with the eternal fire, but there are many Jewish ceremonies preserved in the present day which bear a close resemblance to the ritual of ancient Mazdaism. In addition, there is a documentary evidence preserved in the Arabic Gospel of Infancy, chapter 7, that the Magi came from the east to Jerusalem according to a prophecy of Zoroaster. For a concise statement of the Persian religion, which in many respects foreshadows the Christian doctrines of a Savior and of the bodily resurrection of the dead, see Professor A.V. William Jackson's excellent article, The Ancient Persian Doctrine of a Future Life, published in the Biblical World, August 1896. The Persian world conception, like the religion of the Jews, was too abstract to favor any artistic development. Therefore, we do not possess representations of either good or evil spirits which are exclusively and peculiarly Persian. Even the picture of Ahura Mazda, as we find it in various bas-reliefs, is not based upon a conception that could be said to be regarded as original. The figure from which the bust of the god of light and goodness rises can be traced to Assyrian emblems and may, for all we know, be of Akkadian origin. There is, for instance, an Assyrian cylinder which represents a worshipper standing before the idol of a god. Behind him is the tree of life, and a priest carrying in his left hand a rosary, while the deity hovers above them in a similar shape to the Ahura Mazda pictures of the Persians. Ahura Mazda is pictured as a winged disc without any head, in the style of Chaldean sun pictures, and a cameo representing him as worshipped by two sphinxes between whom the sacred Haoma plant is seen. In another cameo, he appears as a human figure without wings, rising from a crescent that hovers above the sacrificial fire. Above him is a picture of the sun, and before him stands a priest or a king in an attitude of adoration. There are some magnificent representations of Ahura Mazda on ancient Persian monuments which claim our special attention. There is a loftiness and a majesty about his appearance which lifts his picture above the Assyrian conception of deities. In his hands, he holds either a ring or the short royal staff of rulers, appearing at the top like a lotus flower. Professor A.V. Williams Jackson explains the ring in the hand of Ahura Mazda as the circle of sovereignty, and interprets the loop with streamers in which the figure floats as a variation of the same idea, for in some of the pictures it appears as a chaplet or waist garland with ribbons. It is not possible that the loop with streamers is originally a disc representing the disk of the sun after the fashion of Egyptian temple decorations. At any rate, there are a great number of Assyrian sculptures of the same type which are unequivocally representations of the sun. A cylinder published in Lajar's Culte de Mithra, illustrating the myth of the god Izdubar's descent to Hasisatra, shows the two scorpion genii of the horizon watching the rise and the setting of the sun. Here the sun appears like the figure from the Ahura Mazda rises as a winged disc with feather tail and streamers. In addition, we find the same picture in the deity that protects the tree of life, which can only signify the benign influence of the sun on plants. And the old Babylonian cylinder representing Merodach's fight with the evil spirit that darkens the moon shows the feather dial in this same conventional method covered with clouds. A representation of Ahiram has not yet been discovered among the Persian antiquities. There is, however, a bas-relief in Persepolis which depicts the king in the act of slaying a unicorn. The monster is very similar to the Assyrian Tiamat, and we cannot doubt that the Persian sculptor imitated the style of his Assyrian predecessors. We have little information concerning the origin of Zoroaster's dualism, but we can nevertheless reconstruct it, at least in rough outlines. For there are witnesses left, even today, at the historical past of the old Persian religion. A sect called the Izetes are the fossil representatives of the devil worship that preceded the purer notions of the Zoroastrian worship prevailing in the Zend Avesta. Following the authority of a German traveler, Tyler says from the Primitive Culture, Volume 2, page 329, quote, The Yazidis, or Yazidis, the so-called devil worshippers, still remain a numerous though oppressed people in Mesopotamia and adjacent countries. Their adoration of the sun and horror of defiling fire accord with the idea of a Persian origin of their religion. Persianized equals God, and origin underlying more superficial admixture of Christian and Muslim elements. This remarkable sect is distinguished by a special form of dualism. While recognizing the existence of a supreme being, their peculiar reverence is given to Satan, chief of the angelic host, who now has the means of doing evil to mankind, and in his restoration will have the power of rewarding them. Will not Satan then reward the poor Yazidis, who alone have never spoken ill of him and have suffered so much for him? Martyrdom for the rights of Satan, exclaims the German traveler, to whom an old white-bearded devil worshipper thus set forth the hopes of his religion. End quote. The peculiar creed of the Yazidis is similar to the religion of devil-worshipping savages insofar as the recognition of the good powers is not entirely lacking, but it is, as it were, a merely negative element. The positive importance of goodness is not yet recognized. It is probable that the Persians in prehistoric times were as much devil worshippers as the Yazidis. The devas, the deities of the irresistible forces of nature, were pacified by sacrifices. A recognition of the power of moral endeavor as represented in the personified virtues, the Amisha Spenta, was the product of a slow development. Thus in Persia, the devil worship of the devas yielded to the higher religion of God worship, and this change marks a decided step in advance, resulting soon afterwards in the Persians becoming one of the leading nations of the world. Israel, Azazel, the god of the desert. The primitive stages of the Hebrew civilization are not sufficiently known to describe the changes and phases which the Israelitic idea of the Godhead had to undergo before it reached the purity of the Yahweh conception. Yet the Israelites also must have had a demon not unlike the Egyptian Typhon, for the custom of sacrificing a goat to Azazel, the demon of the desert, suggests that the Israelites had just emerged from a dualism in which both principles were regarded as equal. We read in Leviticus 16, quote, "And Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for Azazel. And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell, and offer him for a sin offering, but the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord, to make atonement with him and to let him go to Azazel in the desert." End quote. The name Azazel is derived from Aziz, which means strength, and El, God. The god of war at Edessa is called Azizos, the strong one. Baal Aziz was the strong god, and Rosh Aziz, the head of the strong one, is the name of the promontory on the Phoenician coast. Azazel, accordingly, means the strength of God. The mention of Azazel must be regarded as a last remnant of a prior dualism. Azazel, the god of the desert, ceased to be the strong god and became a mere shadow of his former power, for the scapegoat is no longer a sacrifice. Yahweh's goat alone is offered for a sin offering, while the scapegoat carries out into the desert the curse of the people's sin, and thus the worship of Azazel changed into a mere recognition of his existence. These sacrificial ceremonies, however, which, on account of their being parts of religious performances, were only reluctantly discarded, are the lingering vestiges in Hebrew literature of an older dualism in which the power of evil received an equal share of worship with the power of good. Superstitions. The Old Testament contains many noble ideas and great truths. Indeed, it is a most remarkable collection of religious books, than which there is none more venerable in the literature of the world. Yet there are tares among the wheat, and many lamentable errors were, even by some of the leaders of the old Israelites, regarded as essential parts of their religion. The writers of the Bible not only made God responsible for and accessory to the crimes which their own people committed, theft, Exodus chapter 11, and murder and rape, Numbers chapter 31, but they cherished also the same superstitions that were commonly in vogue among the savages. Thus the custom of burying people alive under foundation stones is mentioned as having been sanctioned by the God of Israel. When Jericho was destroyed at the special command of God, all its inhabitants were slain, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the sole exception of Rahab, a disreputable woman who had betrayed the city into the hands of the enemies of her countrymen. And Joshua adjured the people, saying, quote, "Cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it." End quote. Jericho, however, was sure to be built sooner or later, for being the key to Palestine and commanding the entrance into the country from the desert routes, it was too important both for commercial and strategic purposes to be left in ruins. And the man who undertook the work was still superstitious and savage enough to heed Joshua's curse. We read in the first book of Kings, with reference to the reign of Ahab in chapter 15, verse 34, quote, "In his days Hiel the Behalelite built Jericho. He laid the foundation stones thereof in Abiram, his firstborn, and set up the gates thereof in his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Joshua the son of Nun." End quote. The terrible witch persecutions which in the Middle Ages harassed Christianity have their root in passages of the Old Testament. The laws of Exodus chapter 22 provide capital punishment for witchcraft, and the same command is repeated in Leviticus, where we read, quote, "The soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people." Leviticus 20 verse 6. "A man also, or a woman, that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them." Leviticus 20 verse 27. End quote. In spite of the severity of the law against wizards and witches, the Israelites were always inclined to resort to their help. Saul, who had done his best to exterminate soothsayers, from the first book of Sam, chapter 28, when in the greatest anxiety called on the witch of Endor. It is evident from various passages that the Israelites believed in evil spirits dwelling in darkness and waste places. See Leviticus 17 verse 7, Deuteronomy 30 verse 17. Second book of Chronicles 16 verse 15, Isaiah 13 verse 21, Psalms 37. Their names are Serim, chimeras or goat spirits, Lilith, the nightly one, Shedim, demons. The Serim remind us of the Assyrian pictures which represent evil spirits in the shape of goats. It is difficult to say whether these various demons of Hebrews are to be regarded as the residuum of a lower religious stage preceding the period of the monotheistic Yahweh cult, or as witnesses to the existence of superstitions, which certainly haunted the imagination of the uncultured, not less in those days than they do now in this age of advanced civilization. Apparently, the rise of a purer religion was slow, and the habits of a savage age were long lingering. The vestiges of devil worship, with several of its most bestial rites, and even human sacrifices, continued to exist even when a more radiant light began to shine in the world. Satan, the fiend, as a name in the sense of devil, is rarely mentioned in the Old Testament. The word Satan, which means enemy, is freely used, but as a proper name signifying the devil, appears only 5 times. And it is noteworthy that the same event is, in 2 parallel passages, attributed in the older one to Yahweh and in the younger one to Satan. We read in the 2nd book of Samuel, chapter 14, verse 1, "The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, 'Go number Israel and Judah.'" The same fact is mentioned in the 1st book of Chronicles, chapter 21, verse 1. "Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel." In all the other older books of Hebrew literature, especially in the Pentateuch, Satan is not mentioned at all. All acts of punishment, revenge, and temptation are performed by Yahweh himself or by his angel at his direct command. So the temptation of Abraham, the slaughter of the firstborn in Egypt, the brimstone and fire rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah, the evil spirit which came upon Saul, the pestilence to punish David, all these things are expressly said to have come from God. Even the perverse spirit which made the Egyptians err, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14, the lying spirit which was in the mouths of the prophets of Ahab, the 1st book of Kings, chapter 22, verse 23, and also the 2nd book of Chronicles, chapter 18, verse 20, ignorance and indifference, Isaiah chapter 29, verse 10, are directly attributed to acts of God. The prophet Zechariah speaks of Satan as an angel whose office it is to accuse and to demand the punishment of the wicked. In the book of Job, where the most poetical and grandest picture of the evil one is found, Satan appears as a malicious servant of God who enjoys performing the functions of a tempter, torturer, and avenger. He accuses unjustly, like a state's attorney who prosecutes from a mere habit of prosecution and delights in convicting even the innocent, while God's justice and goodness are not called in question. It is noteworthy that Satan, in the canonical books of the Old Testament, is an adversary of man, but not of God. He is a subject of God and God's faithful servant. The Jewish idea of Satan received some additional features from the attributes of the gods of surrounding nations. Nothing is more common in history than the change of deities of hostile nations into demons of evil. In this way, Beelzebub, the Phoenician god, became another name for Satan, and Hinnom, i.e. Gehenna, the place where Moloch had been worshipped in the valley of Tophet, became the Hebrew name for hell in the place of the word Sheol, the world of the dead underground. The idol of Moloch was made of brass, and its stomach was a furnace. According to the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel, children were placed in the monster's arms to be consumed by the heat of the idol. The cries of the victims were drowned by drums, from which Toph, meaning drum, the place was called Tophet. Even the king, Manasseh, long after David made his son pass through the fire of Moloch, from the book of Kings 2, chapter 21, Josiah endeavored to make an end of this terrible practice by defiling Tophet in the valley of the children of Hinnom, in the book of Kings, chapter 33, verse 10. Thus, the very name of this foreign deity naturally and justly became among the Israelites the symbol of abomination and fiendish superstition. The historical connection of Israel's religion with the mythologies of Assyria and Babylon begins now to be better understood, since we have learned to decipher the ancient cuneiform records. There are many most significant reminiscences of Baal-Merodach's combat with Tiamat left in the Old Testament, and Hermann Gunkel, after having given a literal translation of the several passages with explanatory comments, says, from Schlafung and Chaos, page 88, quote, "Nowhere in extant literature is the myth of Yahweh's combat with the dragon actually narrated. Judaism the distinctive work of which was the collection of the canon, did not admit myths that savored of heathendom. Nevertheless, the fact that in all the passages that speak of the dragon, the myth is not portrayed but simply presupposed, proves that it was very well known and very popular with the people. The absence of the myth in the canon, and this, in the interest of the Christian reader, need not be deplored, is distinct and conclusive evidence that we possess in our Old Testament a fragment only of the old religious literature. The myth was from the very beginning in Israel a hymn to Yahweh. The Yahweh hymn, therefore, is the favorite place for making reference to the dragon myth, of which we have a beautiful instance in the book of Psalm. The poet that portrays Yahweh's oppression of humanity in the book of Job. The prophet that terrorizes the sinning people with pictures of Yahweh's omnipotence. He that arouses the people languishing under a foreign dominion in the book of Isaiah, all make direct reference to Yahweh's power, even over the dragon. Footnote. It is noteworthy that the seven-armed candlestick of the Arch of Titus contains on its base figures of dragons, which we may justly assume to be Leviathan, Behemoth, and Rahab, the mythological monsters of Israel. Brahmanism and Hinduism. India, the primitive home of religion and philosophy, exhibits as strong a tendency for monism as the Persian nation has shown for dualism. But the ancient monism of India is apt to lose itself in pantheism, a theory according to which the all alone, or rather the conception of the absolute as the all, is possessed of reality, while all concrete existences are considered as a mere sham, an illusion, a dream. Footnote. Pantheism, the theory of the all, is different from pantheism, the theory which identifies the all with God. End footnote. The polytheism of the popular Hinduism is practically a pantheism in which the various deities are regarded as aspects of the one and all, in which a discrimination between God and evil is entirely lost sight of. Footnote. Sir Monier Williams distinguishes between Brahmanism, the old faith of the Indian Aryas, and Hinduism, the modern form of this same religion as it developed after the expulsion of Buddhism from India. End of footnote. Thus, the struggle between good and evil is contemplated as a process of repeated God incarnations made necessary, according to the idea of the Brahmins, by the appearance of tyranny and injustice, lack of reverence for the priest, encroachments of the warrior caste on the supremacy of the Brahmins, or some other disorder. While the enemies of the gods, giants, demons, and other monsters are not radically bad, and cannot be regarded as devils in the sense of the Christian Satan, the Brahmin gods, in their turn, are by no means the representatives of pure goodness. Not only do they frequently assume shapes that, to the taste of any Western nation, would be exceedingly ugly and diabolical, but the same deities, who in one aspect are beneficent powers of life, are in another respect demons of destruction. Brahm, the highest god of Brahmanism, represents the all, or the abstract idea of being. He is conceived as a trinity which is called Trimurti, consisting of Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva. Brahma, the first originated of all beings, the lord of all creatures, the father of all the universes, is the divine mind, who is the beginning of all. He is called Aja, the not born, because he has originated but was not begotten. Brahma originated from Tat, i.e., undifferentiated being, in which he existed from eternity in an embryonic form. Brahma's consort, Sarasvati, also called Brahmi or Brahmini, is the goddess of poetry, learning, and music. Brahma is the creator of man. We are told in the Yajurveda that the god produced from himself the soul, which is accordingly a part of his own being, and clothed it with a body, a process which is reported in the reverse order in the Hebrew Genesis, where Elohim creates first the body and then breathes the life into the body, which makes of man a living soul. Brahma is pictured with 4 heads and 4 hands, in which he holds a spoon, a sacrificial basin, a rosary, and the Vedas. One of the 4 hands is frequently represented as empty. He sits on a lotus which grows from Vishnu's navel, representing the spirit that broods over the waters. Brahma keeps the first place in the speculations of philosophers, where he is identified with the life breath of the world, the Atman or self that appears in man's soul, but he has not exercised a great influence on the people. The gods of the people must be less abstract, more concrete, and more human. Thus it is natural that Vishnu, the second person of the Trinity, the deity of avatars or incarnations, is, for all practical purposes, by far more important than Brahma. Vishnu appears in the following 10 incarnations. Footnote: since it is our intention to be brief, we do not enter into this exposition of the 10 avatars into any details that could be omitted and neglect to mention the variants of the myths. End of footnote. In the first incarnation, called the Matsya Avatar, Vishnu assumes the form of a fish in order to recover the Vedas stolen by evil demons and hidden in the floods of a deluge that covered the whole earth. This incarnation is of interest because we read in the Pisti Sophia, one of the most important Gnostic books, that the books of Eo, which were dictated by God to Enoch in paradise, were preserved by the Kalapadaroth from destruction in the deluge. In order to enable the gods to procure the immortality-giving drink, Amrita, Vishnu appeared as an immense tortoise in the Kum Avatar, his second incarnation. He lifted on his back the world pillar, the mountain Mandaras, and the world serpent Vasuki, or Anantas, was wound about it like a rope. The gods seized the tail, the demons Daityas the head, and began to churn the ocean, which produced Vishnu's gem, Kaustubha. Varunani, the goddess of the sea, the Apsaras, lovely sprites corresponding to the Greek nymphs, Indra's horse with 7 heads, Kamaldihunu, the cow of plenty, Airavata, Indra's elephant, the tree of abundance, Chandra, the god of the moon, Sura, the goddess of wine, and finally Davantari, the Indian Asclepius, who is in possession of the water of life. The serpent began now to spit venom, which blinded the demons, while the gods drank the Amrita. Varunani, when conceived as goddess of beauty, is called Lakshmi or Shri, and it is noteworthy that, like Aphrodite of the Greeks, she originates from the froth of the ocean. The third incarnation is Varaha Avatar, in which Vishnu, in the shape of a wild boar, kills with his tusk the demon Hiranyaksha, who threatened to destroy the world. Hiranyaksha's brother, Hiranyakasipu, had a son by the name of Prahlada, who was a pious devotee of Vishnu. The unnatural father tried to kill his son, but the latter escaped all danger because he did not cease to pray to Vishnu. When Hiranyakasipu expressed a doubt of Vishnu's omnipresence, mockingly declaring that he could not possibly be in a column to which he pointed, the wrathful god decided to punish the scoffer. The column rent in twain, and Vishnu, proceeding from its interior in the shape of a monster half man, half lion, tore Hiranyakasipu to pieces. This fourth incarnation is called Nara Singhavatar. Its moral is to impress upon the people the sad fate of those who do not believe in Vishnu. Prahlada's grandson, Balis, was a pious king, but on that very account dangerous to the gods, for he was just about to complete the 100th grand sacrifice by which he would have acquired sufficient power to dethrone Indra. Vishnu came to the assistance of the god of heaven and appeared before Balis as a dwarf in guise of a Brahmin mendicant. Balis honored him with presents and promised to fulfill his desire, whereupon the dwarf requested 3 paces of ground. This was gladly granted under a rigid oath that would be binding on gods and men. Then the dwarf assumed a huge shape and stepped with the first pace over the whole earth, with the second over the atmosphere, with the third into the infinity of the heavens. This is the reason why Vishnu is called Tripadas, or Trivikramas, the 3-paced god. Thus Balis was prevented completing the 100th sacrifice, and Indra was again safe on his throne. This dwarf incarnation is called the Vamana avatar. The 6th incarnation, called the Parashura avatar, is historical in its character, for it reflects the struggles between the warrior caste and the Brahmins for supremacy. It is said that Jamadagni, a pious Brahmin, had received from the gods the miraculous cow Kamaduga or Surabhi, which provided him, his wife Renuka, and their son Rama with every luxury. Kartavirya, a king of the warrior caste, visits him and, seeing the wealth of the Brahmin, tries to take the cow from him, but the cow kills all who dare to approach her and rises into heaven, whereupon Kartavirya, in his wrath, slays the pious Jamandagni. Rama, the son of the murdered Brahmin, invokes Vishnu's help for the punishment of the wicked king, and the god not only presents him with a bow and a battle axe, which latter is called in Sanskrit Parakus, the Greeks Felinus, hence the name of this avatar, but also incarnates himself in Rama. Kartavirya is described as being in possession of 1,000 arms, wielding 1,000 weapons, but Rama, endowed with the divine powers of Vishnu, conquers him after a decisive struggle. The Ramachandra avatar has taken a firm hold on the Indian mind and is described in the Ramayana, an epic which is the Hindu Odyssey, to the narrative of which the legend of Rama bears a great resemblance. Ramachandra lived with his wife Sita, frequently regarded as an incarnation of Lakshmi, and with his half-brother Lakshmana in the wilderness of the south, where he had withdrawn in order to obey his father, who had unjustly banished him and appointed Bharata, another son of his, as heir to the throne. The demon king Ravana waged war against Rama and carried off Sita while he and his brother were hunting. It is impossible to relate here Rama's adventures in detail, how he fought with giants and demons, how the monkey kings Sugriva and Hanuman became his allies, how Hanuman jumped over to Lanka, the island of Ceylon, to reconnoiter the enemy's country, how the monkeys built a bridge over the strait by throwing stones into the water, how Rama pursued Ravana to Lanka, and finally, how he vanquished Ravana and recovered his faithful wife, Sita. Like the 6th avatar, the Ramachandra avatar probably contains historical reminiscences. It also resembles both the Trojan War and the Gundrun Saga, the epics of Western nations that relate the story of an abducted wife. The mythical part of all these stories describes the wanderings of the sun god in search of his consort, the moon. In his 8th incarnation, the Krishna avatar, Vishnu has reached the ideal man-god of the Hindus. Kansa, called Kalankura, the tyrant of Mathura, receives the prophecy that the 8th son of his sister, Devaki, will take his throne. He therefore decides to kill all the children of his sister. Her 8th son, Krishna, however, was an incarnation of Vishnu, who spoke at once after his birth, comforted his mother, and gave directions to his father, Vasudeva, how to save him. Vasudeva carried the infant, protected by the serpent king, over the river Jamuna and exchanged him in Gokula for a girl which Yasuda had just born to the cowherd Nanda. Kansa seized at once the girl baby, but before he could kill her, she raised herself into the air, explained to the wrathful king that Krishna had been saved, and disappeared in the form of lightning. Kansa now decided to have all the babies in his empire killed, but Krishna escaped again. A demon nurse was sent to poison him with her venomous milk, but he bit and killed her. while his stepfather decided to remove to a more distant country in order to escape the continued hostilities of the king. Krishna slew the huge serpent Kalinaga, overcame the giant Shishupolu, killed the monster bird that tried to peck out his eyes, and also a malignant wild ass. He also burnt the entrails of the alligator-shaped Pekasurt, who had devoured him, and choked Agyasur, the dragon, who attempted to swallow him. When Krishna had grown to youth, he became the favorite of the lasses of Gokula. When he played the flute, every one of the dancing girls believed that the swain whom she embraced was Krishna himself. He fell in love with the country girl Radha, the story of which is sung in the Jagadiva's poem, Jita Govinda. He protected the cowherds against storm and fire, and finally marched against Kansa, killed him, and took possession of his throne. Krishna plays also a prominent part in the Mahabharata, the Iliad of the Hindus, which describes the war between the Kurus and the Pandus, both descendants of the Bharata and both children of Vyasa. Footnote: the Pandus are also called Pandavas and the Kurus Kamavas. That the 5 Pandus held Draupadi in common as their wife proves the high antiquity of the story. Polyandry was apparently a practice not uncommon in ancient times. It prevails still today among the less cultured hill tribes, but being at variance with the idea and customs of the age in which the Mahabharata was versified, Vyasa, the Homer or arranger of the poem and its supposed author, tries to explain it allegorically by declaring that Draupadi is Lakshmi and the 5 Pandu brothers represent 5 different forms of one and the same Indra. End of footnote. Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kurus, was king of Hastinapur, but being blind, Bhishma, his uncle, reigned in his stead. After a test of the faculties of the young princes, in which the Pandu Arjuna, the skilled bowman, and the Hindu Tel, showed himself superior to all the others, the oldest Pandu prince, Yudhishthira, was installed as heir apparent. The Kurus, however, who managed to remain in power, tried to burn the Pandus, but they escaped and lived for some time in the disguise of mendicant Brahmins. Having allied themselves by marriage with Draupadi, the daughter of Drupada, king of Panchala, with a powerful monarch, the Pandus reappeared at Hastinapur and induced Dhritarashtra to divide the kingdom between his sons, the Kurus, and his nephews, the Pandus. But at a festival held at Hastinapur, Yudhishthira, the chief of the Pandus, staked in a game of dice his kingdom, all his possessions, and Draupadi herself, and lost everything. The Kurus promised their cousins to return their share of the kingdom after 13 years if they would live 12 years with Draupadi in the forest and remain another year in exile. But when this period had elapsed, the Kurus refused to give up the country or any part of it, and thus the war became unavoidable. Then Duryodhana, the Kuru prince, and Arjuna, the main hero of the Pandus, called on Krishna for succor and assistance. Krishna decided not to take an active part in the fight himself, but left to Arjuna, whom he had seen first, the choice between his, Krishna's, company as a mere advisor or his, Krishna's, army of 100 million warriors. Arjuna chose Krishna himself and left the 100 million warriors to his rivals, the Kurus. The 2 armies met on the field of Kurukshetra near Delhi. During the battle, as we read in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna accompanies Arjuna as his charioteer and explains to him the depth and breadth of the religious philosophy of the Hindus. The Pandus conquer the Kurus, and Yudhishthira becomes king of Hastinapur. After sundry additional adventures, the Pandus die and go to heaven, where they find that rest and happiness which is unattainable on earth. The Mahabharata, like the Wars of the Roses, shows neither party in a favorable light, but the epic is written from the standpoint of the Pandus, whose demeanor is always extolled, while the Kurus are throughout characterized as extremely unworthy and mean. Krishna is the Hindu Apollo, Orpheus, and Hercules in one person, and there is no good in the Hindu pantheon who is dearer to the Brahmin heart than he. Many of his adventures, such as his escape from the Hindu Herod, the massacre of babes, his transfiguration, etc., reappear in a modified form in Buddhist legends and bear some resemblance to the events told of Christ in the New Testament. In his 9th incarnation, Vishnu appears as Buddha, the enlightened one, to be a teacher of morals, of purity, clarity, and compassionate love toward all beings. It is difficult to state the differences between the Buddha avatar of the Brahmins and the Buddha of the Buddhists. The latter, there can be no doubt, was a historical personality by the name of Gautama, the son of Shuddhodana of the warrior caste, while the former is a mere ideal figure of ethical perfection. Burnoff proposes to regard both as quite distinct, and he is right, but we need not for the reason deny that, on the one hand, the ideal of the Buddha avatar was a prominent factor in the formation of Buddhism, while on the other hand, Gautama's teachings have, since the rise of Buddhism, powerfully affected and considerably modified the Buddha ideal of the Brahmins. Whatever may be the historical relation between the Hindu Buddha and the Buddha of the Buddhist, this much is sure. The Buddha has been received by the Brahmins as one of the members of the Hindu pantheon. The Hindu deity that is nearest in spirit to the Buddha avatar is Jagannath, the god of love and mercy. The 10th avatar has not yet been completed. Vishnu is expected to appear on a winged white horse to reward the virtuous, convert the sinners, and destroy all evil. The horse has one foot raised, and when it places its foot down, the time of the incarnation will find its fulfillment. The third person of the Indian Trinity is Siva, the auspicious one, representing the end of the world and its regeneration. He is commonly represented by the linga as a symbol of the creative faculty and by the all-devouring fire, the tongued flame of which is pictured in a triangle turning its point upwards. Sir Monier Williams in Brahmanism and Hinduism says of this deity, which is more mystical and less human than the incarnated Vishnu, that his symbol, the linga, is never in the mind of a Saiva or Siva worshipper connected with indecent ideas nor with sexual love. The linga, or as the Romans called it, the phallus, the male organ of generation, becomes at the first dawn of civilization, almost among all the nations of the world, an object of great awe and reverence. As the symbol of the creative principle, it is regarded as the most essential attribute of both the God Creator himself and all those who hold authority in his name. The linga develops in the hand of the medicine man into a wand, in the hand of the priest into a staff, and in the hand of the king into a scepter. The yoni, or female organ, is regarded as the symbol of Siva's consort, Parvati, and is worshipped in connection with the linga by the sect of the Saktis. Perforated rocks are considered as emblems of the yoni, through which pilgrims pass for the purpose of being regenerated, a ceremony in which Hindus place great faith for its sin-expelling significance. See Charles Coleman, The Mythology of the Hindus. Siva's consort, Kali, is one of the greatest divinities of India. She is the goddess of 100 names, representing not only the power of nature, but also the ruthless cruelty of nature's laws. She is called Parvati, the Blessed Mother, and Durga, which means hard to go through, symbolizing war and all kinds of danger. She is, in the pantheon of modern Hinduism, the central figure. And in spite of the universality of Brahma in philosophical speculations, in spite of the omnipresence of Vishnu and his constant reincarnations as told in ancient myths and legends, in spite of the omnipotence of Siva and the high place given him in the Hindu dogmatology, she is the main recipient of Hindu worship all over the country. As Kali, she is identified with time, the all-devourer, and is pictured as enjoying destruction, perdition, and murder in any form, trampling underfoot even her own husband. There is scarcely a village without a temple devoted to her, and her images can be seen in thousands of forms. Her appearance is pleasant only as Parvati. In all other shapes she is frightful, and it is difficult to understand the reverence which the pious Hindu cherish for this most diabolical deity, who among the Buddhists of Tibet is changed into a devilish demon under the name of Mukha Groma. The pantheism which lies at the bottom of the whole Hindu mythology finds expression in the worship of Harihara, who is a combination of Vishnu and Shiva. In the Mahatmya, or collection of temple legends of the Harihara, a town in the province of Mysore, Isvara, says, quote, "The legends of the shrine of Harihara, translated from the Sanskrit by Rev. Thomas Folks. There are heretics among men who reject the Vedas and the Shastras, who live without purificatory ceremonies and established rules of conduct, and are filled with hatred of Vishnu. So also there are heretical followers of Vishnu, who are similarly filled with hatred of Shiva. All these wicked men shall go to hell, so long as this world endures. I will not receive worship from any man who makes a distinction between Vasudeva and my own divinity. I will divide every such man in two with my saw. For I have assumed the form of Harihara in order to destroy the teaching that there is a difference between us. And he who knows within himself that Harihara is the God of gods shall inherit the highest heaven." End quote. Harihara is depicted as a combination of the two gods in one figure, which is half male and half female. For according to the southern version of the legend, Vishnu assumed the form of a beautiful woman who was embraced so fervently by Shiva that both became one. There are in Hindu mythology innumerable other deities, among whom Indra, the thunder god, is the greatest, as the hero among the gods of secondary rank, reminding us of the Thor of the Norsemen. But Varuna, the Hindu Kronos, Agni, the god of fire, have also, at times, been very prominent. There are, in addition, gods of third degree, such as Kama, the Hindu Amor, Ganesha, the elephant-headed god of wisdom. Footnote: Ganesha, which means the Lord, Isa of hosts, Gana, is originally Shiva himself, and he was invoked under the name of writers of books to drive away evil demons. End of footnote. And Kartikeya, the leader of the good demons, on the peacock, both sons of Shiva and others. In addition, we have a great number of devas, sprites, and goblins. Some of them are good, as the Gandharvas, others at least not naturally ill-intentioned, as for instance the Apsaras, a kind of Hindu elves, but most of them are dangerous and demoniacal. Such are the general mischief makers, the Asuras, the Pretas or ghosts, the Bhutas or spook spirits, the baby-killing Grahas, the Rakshasas, who are either giants or vampires, not to mention all the other demons of less power and importance. End of chapter. Meet me at the next video. We continue with this book titled The History of the Devil and the Idea of Evil from the Earliest Times to the Present Day by Paul Carus. He's going to now talk how this presence, this evil, this devil influenced in Buddhism, the dawn of a new era, and yes, the pretty and the ugly of early Christianity. Please hit the like button, share this with friends of like mind that may be interested in this topic, and subscribe to the channel.